And welcome to Local Edition on Time Warner Cable. This is the Sacramento Report, and I'm Steve Swat. My guest this segment is Bob Huff, who is the Senate Republican leader. Thank you very much for being with us.
Great to be back with you, Steve.
I thought we'd take a few minutes to talk a little bit about process, and I know a lot of folks tune out when you talk about legislative process, but it does make a difference, and it is important, and there's a measure on the ballot sort of falling through the cracks, I think, in terms of publicity that deals with process in terms of how the legislature does its business. And you know, we've been going through the end of a legislative session that I can tell you from being a former Capitol reporter is a nightmare. I mean, that old saying about if you like the law and the sausage, you want to see neither being made. Right. I mean, there's a situation. I mean, you end up, you know, on the last night of the session voting on bills that you have not been able to read analyses. Right. I mean, you don't really know what's in them. Mm-hmm. You get maybe 30 seconds to vote on a bill. I mean, it's boom, boom, boom. I mean, is that the way to run a state government?
I think the obvious answer is no, and yet that's how we're run. I think the frustrating thing is we have bills that will kill in committee and we think they're dead. And they get resurrected in the dark of night for those kinds of things. They call them gutting them in. They take a bill that's worked through on, maybe didn't do a whole lot, but they gut everything out of that, insert this language you thought you had killed. Sometimes there's a little twist, so it may not even be what you heard before. Often it's not. They change it, and they do that so they can get some pretty ugly stuff passed that, given the scrutiny that it should get, you know, it would not.
So you end up with bills that are voted on, you know, as you're nearing midnight on the last night, and these are basically the same bill has been defeated once or twice or three times in committee and is now resurrected into a new bill, right, hijacked, if you will, and quite often gets out that way.
Well, yeah, and there again, the devil's in the details. So you've seen the subject matter before, but you don't know exactly what this does, and it could have a very significant nuance that's not caught by the few people that do read it prior to us voting on it. So it's a big issue. I think that's frankly what is propelling this California forward and others that have qualified this initiative, that one of the requirements is requiring 72 hours in print before we vote on something. Imagine that, actually 72 hours to look at something before we vote.
Well, I've witnessed floor sessions where the members are sitting around and all of a sudden they're handed a piece of paper with, you know, the guts of a bill and told like a minute later you're voting.
Well, you've heard the term hot off the press. It's it's not a press anymore. It's a photocopy machine, but it's still warm from that when we're getting this stuff. Let
me ask you, it's a segue, but it's on the same subject. One of the other provisions that California voters will vote on is a 2-year budget. And a lot of times, I mean, folks for years have been saying if we had a 2-year budget, it'll help with our planning and a little more stability. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think that we already look forward, but you know, it's just sort of so you have an idea of what the calculus where it's going. But if you have a 2-year budget, you actually got to solve for 2 years at a time, and it should bring a little more stability to the process. Because if you know you're going to be okay this year, but you're falling off the cliff the next year, that changes how you do things in the first year. I think that's the thought behind the 2-year budget.
But quite often now, we pass a budget July 1st, and within days or weeks, it's out of whack already. So how do you look forward for 2 years?
Well, a little more thoughtfully. And frankly, remember, we now are operating on our second cycle under a majority vote budget, and we were told that if only we could do this with a 50% vote rather than the 2/3 vote before, all these problems would be solved because the majority party would be able to, you know, put together a meaningful, lasting budget without having to go deal with the Republicans.
Yeah, but they can't raise new revenue without you.
They can't raise new revenues. They could certainly do the other half of the equation, which is making the cuts necessary, or doing policies that help grow the jobs to bring in the revenues to balance the budget.
All right. Well, our time is up in this segment. It goes by very quickly, but Senator Huff, thanks for coming by, talking about these issues. We appreciate it. Thanks to our viewers also for watching Local Edition on Time Warner Cable. A reminder, you can see this and other interviews on My Government On Demand, also on YouTube. I'm Steve Swat. Have a great day.